Sarah Mitchell stepped off the military transport bus at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, carrying a worn duffel bag and keeping her head down. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training grounds, where dozens of new recruits were gathering for the Elite Special Forces selection program. At 5 feet 4 inches tall, with a slight build, she looked nothing like the typical candidate for one of the military's most demanding programs. The other recruits were already sizing each other up. Most were men in their early 20s, fresh from various military units, all hoping to earn the coveted Green Beret. They had the look of athletes, broad shoulders, thick necks, and the confident swagger that came from years of physical training. Sarah noticed how they glanced at her with barely concealed amusement before dismissing her entirely. "Look what we got here," muttered Jake Thompson, a former football player from Texas whose biceps strained against his uniform sleeves. He nudged his buddy Marcus Rivera, a Marine who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan. "Someone's little sister must have gotten lost on her way to basic training." Marcus chuckled, but there was something in Sarah's posture that made him take a second look. She stood perfectly straight, her eyes scanning the area with the methodical precision of someone who had been trained to notice everything. Still, she was so small that he figured she would wash out in the first week. The training cadre appeared on the field like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Sergeant First Class Davis, a mountain of a man with scars crisscrossing his forearms, stepped forward. His voice carried across the training ground like thunder. "Welcome to Special Forces Assessment and Selection," he announced. "For the next several weeks, we're going to find out who among you has what it takes to join the most elite fighting force in the world. Most of you will fail. Some of you will quit. A few of you might actually surprise us." His eyes swept over the group, pausing briefly on Sarah before continuing. "This program will test everything you think you know about yourself. Your physical limits, your mental toughness, your ability to work under pressure when everything goes wrong. We don't care what you did before you got here. We don't care about your college degrees or your high school football records. All that matters is what you do when we push you beyond what you think is possible." The first day began with a simple run, 5 miles in full gear. Sarah knew the other recruits expected her to struggle, maybe even drop out before they reached the halfway point. She fell in behind the main group, letting them set the pace while she observed their running styles and breathing patterns. Jake and Marcus led the pack, their competitive nature pushing them to outpace everyone else. Behind them came a cluster of former infantry soldiers and a few Navy personnel who had volunteered for the challenge. Sarah maintained a steady pace in the middle of the group, her breathing controlled and her stride efficient. "Hey, tiny dancer," called out Kevin Walsh, a former Army Ranger running beside her. "You sure you're in the right place? The cheerleading tryouts are probably at the community college down the road." Sarah didn't respond. She had heard worse during her years in the military, and she had learned that actions spoke louder than words. Instead, she focused on her breathing and the rhythm of her feet hitting the ground. The miles passed steadily under their boots. By the 3rd mile, some of the larger recruits began to struggle. The weight of their gear felt heavier, and their breathing became labored. Jake, who had started strong, found his pace slowing as his competitive sprint from the beginning caught up with him. Marcus, more experienced in long-distance training, maintained his position but noticed that the small woman he had dismissed earlier was still running with the same steady rhythm she had started with. As they approached the 4-mile mark, Sarah began to move forward through the group. Her pace hadn't changed, but others were slowing down. She passed Kevin, who was now breathing heavily and couldn't spare the air for more taunts. She moved past 3 former Marines who were struggling with the heat and humidity of the North Carolina morning. Jake heard footsteps approaching from behind and glanced over his shoulder, expecting to see Marcus or one of the other strong runners. Instead, he saw Sarah, still maintaining that same steady pace, her face showing no signs of distress. His pride kicked in, and he tried to match her pace, but his legs felt heavy and unresponsive. "What the hell?" he muttered between labored breaths. Sarah pulled alongside him and, for the first time that day, spoke. "Save your energy," she said quietly. "This is just the warm-up." Jake watched in disbelief as she maintained her pace, eventually finishing the run in the top 5, while many of the men who had mocked her earlier struggled to complete the course. After the run, the recruits were given 10 minutes to hydrate and prepare for the next event, an obstacle course that had been designed to test upper body strength, agility, and problem-solving skills under pressure. The course included rope climbs, wall scaling, crawling under barbed wire, and navigating through a maze of barriers while carrying heavy equipment. "This is where size matters," Kevin said to Jake as they watched Sarah studying the course layout. "No way she's getting over those walls or up those ropes." The obstacle course had been the downfall of many candidates over the years. It required not just strength but also technique and strategy. Each recruit would run through it individually, while the others watched and the instructors took notes on their performance. Sarah went in the middle of the group. She had spent the waiting time observing the techniques used by those who went before her, noting which approaches worked and which led to failure. When her turn came, she approached the first obstacle with quiet confidence. The rope climb was first. At 20 feet high, it required significant upper body strength to reach the top. Sarah gripped the rope and began to climb, using a technique that emphasized leg strength and efficient movement, rather than relying solely on arm power. Her small size actually worked to her advantage here, requiring less total strength to lift her body weight. She reached the top faster than most of the larger recruits had managed. The wall scaling came next. At 12 feet high, it seemed impossible for someone of Sarah's stature to overcome. But she had studied the technique used by the most successful climbers who had gone before her. Instead of trying to power her way over, she used momentum and precise foot placement to walk up the wall, grabbing the top edge and pulling herself over in one smooth motion. The barbed wire crawl tested endurance and pain tolerance. Recruits had to army crawl under strands of barbed wire for 50 yards while carrying their weapon in a heavy pack. Many of the larger men struggled with this obstacle because their size made it difficult to stay low enough to avoid the wire. Sarah's small frame allowed her to move through the section with minimal contact with the barbed wire. She maintained a steady pace, keeping her weapon clean and her equipment secure while others around her got tangled and had to backtrack. The final section was a carrying exercise where recruits had to transport heavy ammunition boxes across uneven terrain while navigating around barriers. This was where many expected Sarah to finally fail. The boxes weighed 80 pounds each, and the course required carrying 2 of them simultaneously. Sarah approached this challenge differently than the men who had gone before her. While they had tried to muscle through it with brute strength, she used leverage and balance, keeping the weight close to her center of gravity and taking shorter, more controlled steps. Her technique was so efficient that she actually finished this section faster than several recruits who were significantly larger and stronger. When she completed the course, the training ground felt unusually quiet. Her overall time was in the top 3, ahead of most of the men who had been so confident at the beginning of the day. The instructors exchanged glances but kept their expressions neutral. That evening in the barracks, the dynamic among the recruits had shifted. The easy dismissal of Sarah was replaced by curiosity and, for some, a grudging respect. But for others, her performance only increased their resentment. "Must be nice to get special treatment," Jake muttered, loud enough for others to hear. "Bet they made those obstacles easier when it was her turn." "Same course, same rules," replied Tom Chen, a former Air Force pararescue specialist who had watched every run carefully. She just knew what she was doing. Marcus had been thinking about Sarah's performance all afternoon. Something about her technique and composure reminded him of instructors he had encountered during his most challenging training experiences. "Where did you serve before this?" he asked her directly. Sarah looked up from the equipment she was cleaning. "Different places," she said simply, then returned to her work. It was a non-answer that only increased the questions in Marcus's mind. Most recruits were eager to share their background and experiences, using their service record as a way to establish credibility with their peers. Sarah's reluctance to discuss her past suggested either humility or secrets. The next morning brought new challenges. Physical training included a brutal circuit of exercises designed to test functional strength and endurance. Pull-ups, push-ups, sit-ups, and a variety of other exercises that would determine who had the physical foundation necessary for the advanced training to come. Again, Sarah's performance surprised those who had underestimated her. While she couldn't match the raw numbers put up by the largest and strongest recruits, her form was perfect, her endurance impressive, and her overall scores placed her well above the minimum requirements. But it was during the afternoon's tactical exercise that Sarah truly began to stand out. The recruits were divided into teams and given a basic reconnaissance mission. They had to plan and execute a patrol to gather information about a simulated enemy position without being detected. Most of the teams approached the exercise with enthusiasm but little sophistication. They relied on size and aggression, trying to power their way through the scenario. Sarah's team took a different approach entirely. She listened as her teammates discussed their plan, offering occasional suggestions that showed a deep understanding of tactical principles. When they reached the training area, she moved through the terrain like someone who had done this many times before. Her positioning was always optimal, her movements silent, and her observations detailed and accurate. "How do you know so much about this stuff?" asked David Park, one of her teammates, as they completed their mission successfully. "You pick things up," Sarah replied, but there was something in her eyes that suggested her knowledge came from more than just picking things up. That night, as the recruits settled into their bunks after another exhausting day, the conversations were different. Instead of dismissing Sarah outright, some were beginning to wonder about her background. Others, particularly those who had performed poorly, were becoming more hostile. "I don't care how well she did today," Jake said quietly to his circle of friends. "There's no way she belongs here. This is men's work, and she's going to get someone killed when it counts." "Maybe," said Marcus, "or maybe we don't know what we're talking about." "We'll see about that. Tomorrow we start the real training. Let's see how tough she is when things get serious." Sarah lay in her bunk, listening to the whispered conversations around her. She had been through programs like this before, though none of the other recruits knew that. She understood that her presence challenged their assumptions about strength, capability, and belonging. Some would eventually accept her based on performance. Others would never accept her at all. She thought about the phone call that had brought her here. The voice on the other end had been familiar, belonging to someone who knew her real background and capabilities. "We need someone inside the Special Forces selection program," the voice had said. "Someone who can blend in but also assess the quality of training and identify any security vulnerabilities." Sarah's official military record showed service as an intelligence analyst with no combat experience. It was a carefully constructed cover that had been maintained for years. Her real background was something else entirely, something that would have shocked every recruit in the barracks if they had known the truth. She had already completed training programs that made Special Forces selection look like basic conditioning. She had served in units that didn't officially exist, conducting operations that were never acknowledged by the government. She was here not to earn a Green Beret, but to evaluate the program from the inside while maintaining her cover as just another hopeful recruit. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on her. The men who questioned her belonging had no idea that she was probably the most qualified person in the entire selection class. But maintaining her cover meant enduring their skepticism and proving herself according to their standards, not revealing her true capabilities. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah thought about the weeks ahead. The physical challenges would continue to get harder, but those weren't her primary concern. The real test would be maintaining her cover while dealing with the increasing hostility from recruits who couldn't accept that their assumptions might be wrong. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she would meet them with the same quiet competence she had shown today. But she also knew that some of her fellow recruits were planning to make her time in the program as difficult as possible. They had no idea what they were getting themselves into. In the darkness of the barracks, Sarah smiled slightly. If they wanted to test her, she was ready. They just had no idea what they were really testing. The third week of selection brought a dramatic increase in difficulty. The instructors had weeded out the recruits who lacked basic physical conditioning, and now they were focusing on mental toughness and tactical skills. The remaining candidates included the strongest and most determined individuals from the original group, which only intensified the competition and rivalry. Sarah had continued to perform well in every aspect of training, but her success had created an unexpected problem. Instead of earning respect from her fellow recruits, her achievements had made her a target for those who couldn't accept that she belonged in their elite world. The morning began with what the instructors called stress inoculation. The recruits were awakened at 3 a.m. with shouting and chaos, forced to dress quickly and form up outside in the cold rain that had been falling since midnight. Sleep deprivation was becoming a constant factor in their lives, and the instructors were now adding unexpected elements to test how the candidates performed when they couldn't predict what was coming next. "Today we find out who can think clearly when everything is falling apart," announced Sergeant First Class Davis as the recruits stood at attention in the downpour. "You're going to be tested on your ability to make decisions under pressure, work as a team when communication breaks down, and maintain your effectiveness when you're cold, tired, and confused." The first exercise involved navigation through dense forest terrain, using only basic compass skills and terrain features. Each recruit would be given coordinates for multiple checkpoints that they had to reach in sequence within a strict time limit. The catch was that they would be carrying full combat loads and dealing with various obstacles and distractions along the way. But before the exercise began, Jake Thompson approached Sarah with a group of his supporters. The hostility that had been brewing beneath the surface was now coming into the open. "Listen, Princess," Jake said quietly, making sure the instructors couldn't hear. "We've been patient with this little game you're playing, but it ends today. You don't belong here, and we're not going to let you put real soldiers at risk because you want to prove some feminist point." Marcus Rivera stood behind Jake, along with Kevin Walsh and 2 other recruits who had formed a tight alliance based partly on their shared resentment of Sarah's presence. "Nothing personal," Marcus added, though his tone suggested otherwise. "It's just time for you to realize this isn't working out." Sarah looked at each of them calmly. "Is there something specific you think I should know?" "Accidents happen during training. People get lost, equipment fails, things go wrong. Especially when someone isn't strong enough or experienced enough to handle the pressure." The threat was clear, though carefully worded to avoid direct confrontation. They were planning to sabotage her performance, possibly in ways that could put her in real danger. Sarah had anticipated this moment would come, but she was surprised by how openly they were revealing their intentions. "I appreciate the warning," she said simply. "I'll keep it in mind." Her calm response seemed to frustrate them more than anger or fear would have. Jake's face reddened as he realized his intimidation attempt had failed completely. "We'll see how calm you are when you're lost in the woods without your compass," he muttered. As the recruits prepared for the navigation exercise, Sarah considered her options. She could report the threats to the instructors, but that would likely escalate the situation and potentially compromise her mission. She could avoid the confrontation by performing poorly enough to wash out of the program, but that would mean failing in her assignment to evaluate the selection process from the inside. The third option was to deal with whatever they threw at her and continue with her mission. Given her real background and capabilities, she was confident she could handle anything they might try. The question was whether she could do it without revealing too much about her true identity and skills. The navigation course covered 15 miles of challenging terrain, including swamps, dense forest, and steep hills. Each recruit started at a different time and followed a different route to prevent them from simply following each other. Sarah was assigned a particularly difficult path that would take her through some of the most challenging terrain on the base. As she checked her equipment before starting, she noticed that her compass had been tampered with. The adjustment screw had been turned, throwing off the magnetic declination by several degrees. Over the course of a long navigation route, this small change would lead her miles off course and potentially into dangerous terrain. She also discovered that someone had punctured her water bladder, creating a slow leak that would leave her dehydrated before she reached the halfway point. Most concerning, her emergency radio had been damaged in a way that looked accidental, but would prevent her from calling for help if she encountered serious trouble. Sarah quickly calculated her options. She could report the sabotage and get replacement equipment, but that would delay her start time and potentially cause her to fail the exercise due to the time limit. She could also use the sabotage as evidence that some recruits were creating dangerous conditions for others. Instead, she decided to proceed with the exercise using backup methods she had learned during her real training. Messy. She didn't need the compass for navigation if she could use terrain features and natural indicators. She could manage water consumption carefully to deal with the shortage. And her real training had taught her survival techniques that made the emergency radio unnecessary for anything short of a life-threatening medical emergency. What her saboteurs didn't understand was that they had actually given her an opportunity to demonstrate skills that went far beyond what a typical recruit should possess. The question was whether she could complete the exercise successfully without revealing too much about her true capabilities. Sarah began her route at the assigned time, quickly moving into the dense forest that covered most of the course. The rain had stopped, but the canopy kept the forest floor damp and made footing treacherous on steep slopes. She ignored the damaged compass entirely and began navigating using techniques that most recruits had never learned. The position of the sun, filtered through the clouds and tree canopy, gave her a general sense of direction. The growth patterns of moss and lichens on trees provided additional directional clues. The flow of water in small streams indicated the general slope of the terrain and helped her identify the ridgelines and valleys marked on her map. By the time she reached her first checkpoint, Sarah was actually ahead of schedule despite the sabotage attempts. Her route finding had been so efficient that she had saved time compared to recruits who were relying on their compasses but taking less direct paths. The second checkpoint required crossing a swampy area that had claimed several recruits in previous exercises. The official route went around the swamp, adding nearly 2 miles to the total distance. But Sarah's map-reading skills had identified a path directly through the wetlands that would save significant time if someone had the knowledge and courage to attempt it. She studied the terrain carefully, identifying the subtle signs that indicated where the ground would be solid enough to support her weight and where she might break through into deeper water or mud. The direct route was risky, but she had crossed similar terrain many times during her real operations. Moving carefully from one solid spot to the next, Sarah made her way across the swamp in less than 30 minutes. The route around would have taken at least an hour and a half. Her unconventional approach had given her a significant time advantage, but it had also required skills and confidence that would be unusual for a typical recruit. The third checkpoint was located on a steep hillside that required both navigation skills and physical endurance to reach. This was where Sarah expected her saboteurs to make their next move, since the difficult terrain would provide opportunities for accidents that could be explained as the result of challenging conditions. She was right. As she climbed through a particularly treacherous section of loose rock and fallen trees, she heard movement in the forest behind her. Glancing back carefully, she spotted Jake Thompson and Kevin Walsh moving through the trees roughly parallel to her position. They were supposed to be following their own navigation routes, but they had clearly deviated from their assigned paths to intercept her. Sarah considered her options. She could change her route to avoid them, but that would add time and potentially cause her to miss her checkpoint. She could confront them directly, but that would certainly escalate the situation in ways that might compromise her mission. Instead, she decided to continue with her planned route while remaining alert for whatever they had planned. Her real training had prepared her for situations far more dangerous than anything two disgruntled recruits could create. As she approached a narrow section of trail that crossed a steep slope, Sarah heard rocks falling from above. Looking up, she saw Kevin Walsh positioned on a ledge directly overhead, apparently having climbed above her intended path. More rocks began to fall, and it became clear that this wasn't a natural rock fall. The falling stones were large enough to cause serious injury if they struck her, and the narrow trail left little room for evasive movement. A typical recruit might panic or call for help, potentially washing out of the program due to inability to handle unexpected dangers. Sarah reacted with the smooth efficiency of someone who had dealt with much worse situations. She quickly identified a route off the main trail that would get her out of the danger zone, while still allowing her to reach her checkpoint. Moving with cat-like agility, she scrambled up a steep rock face that paralleled the main trail, using hand and footholds that most people wouldn't have been able to see. Her movement was so fast and controlled that she was out of the danger zone before Kevin could adjust his position to target her new location. From her new vantage point, she could see both Kevin and Jake, who was positioned further down the trail to block her exit from the rocky section. Instead of being trapped between them as they had planned, Sarah now had the high ground and could choose her own route to the checkpoint. She moved quickly along the ridgeline, using terrain features to stay out of their sight while making rapid progress toward her destination. When she reached the third checkpoint, the instructor posted there noted her time and checked her identification. "Fast time through that section," he commented. "Rough terrain back there." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied simply, "but manageable." Her uniform was dirty from the challenging terrain, but she showed no signs of the stress or fatigue that most recruits displayed at this point in the exercise. Her breathing was controlled, her movements remained precise, and her equipment was still properly organized and secured. "See anything unusual on your route?" the instructor asked. Sarah considered the question. Reporting Jake and Kevin's sabotage attempts would certainly be justified and might prevent them from creating more dangerous situations for other recruits. But it would also likely result in their removal from the program, and her mission included evaluating how the selection process dealt with personality conflicts and stress between candidates. "No, sir," she said. "Just challenging terrain." The instructor nodded and marked her time on his clipboard. Sarah continued toward the final checkpoint, knowing that Jake and Kevin would be even more frustrated by their failure to slow her down or force her out of the exercise. The fourth and final checkpoint was located at the top of a steep hill that required a difficult climb up a rocky face. This was often where recruits made critical mistakes due to fatigue and time pressure. The temptation was to take risks with safety in order to make up time, and several serious injuries had occurred at this location during previous selection courses. As Sarah approached the base of the cliff, she realized that Jake and Kevin had abandoned their own navigation routes entirely and were now racing to reach the checkpoint ahead of her. They had taken a shorter but more dangerous route that bypassed two of their assigned waypoints, sacrificing their own performance in the exercise to interfere with hers. She could see them climbing above her, moving recklessly fast, and dislodging loose rocks that tumbled down toward her position. Whether the falling rocks were intentional or simply the result of their careless climbing technique, the effect was the same. She was forced to take cover and lose valuable time. Sarah studied the rock face carefully, identifying an alternative route that would avoid the area where they were climbing. The path she chose was more technically challenging, requiring advanced climbing skills, but it would be safer and potentially faster than waiting for them to clear the area. She began to climb using techniques that would have impressed professional mountaineers. Her movement was fluid and efficient, her route selection optimal, and her speed remarkable for someone carrying full military gear. Within minutes, she had not only caught up to Jake and Kevin, but had actually passed them by using the more difficult route that they hadn't even considered attempting. "What the hell?" Jake gasped as he watched Sarah move past them with apparent ease. "How is she doing that?" Kevin was too focused on his own precarious position to answer. The route they had chosen was proving to be beyond their skill level, and they were now struggling to complete the climb safely. Their plan to interfere with Sarah's exercise had backfired, leaving them in a dangerous situation while she continued toward the checkpoint. Sarah reached the final checkpoint with time to spare, completing the entire navigation course faster than any recruit in the current selection class, and faster than most recruits in the program's history. Her performance was so exceptional that it raised questions about her background and previous training. "Outstanding time," the instructor at the final checkpoint told her as he recorded her results. "Where did you learn to navigate like that?" "Trial and error, sir," Sarah replied, though her answer didn't really explain the level of expertise she had demonstrated. As other recruits began arriving at the final checkpoint, it became clear that Sarah's performance had been truly exceptional. Most were exhausted, stressed, and frustrated by the challenging navigation requirements. Several had gotten lost and required assistance to reach their destinations. A few had been injured by the difficult terrain and needed medical attention. Jake and Kevin arrived nearly 2 hours after Sarah, having been rescued by instructors when their reckless climbing attempt left them stranded on the rock face. They were both shaken by the experience and angry about their poor performance, but their attempts to sabotage Sarah had failed completely. That evening, as the recruits cleaned their equipment and prepared for the next day's training, the conversation focused on Sarah's remarkable navigation performance. Some of the recruits were beginning to accept that she might actually belong in the program, while others were becoming more determined to prove that her success was somehow illegitimate. "No way she learned those skills in regular military service," Jake insisted to anyone who would listen. "She's getting special help or she's not who she claims to be." Tom Chen, the former Air Force pararescue specialist, had been thinking along similar lines, but for different reasons. "The way she moves, the way she reads terrain, the way she stays calm under pressure," he said thoughtfully. "I've seen those skills before, but only in people with very specialized training." Marcus Rivera nodded slowly. "She's definitely not a typical recruit. Question is, what's her real story?" Sarah listened to their speculations while maintaining her focus on equipment maintenance. She knew that her performance was raising questions about her background, but she also knew that her cover identity would hold up under scrutiny. The challenge was balancing the need to complete her mission with the requirement to maintain her disguise as an ordinary recruit. Tomorrow would bring new tests and new opportunities for her fellow recruits to challenge her presence in the program. But tonight she allowed herself a small sense of satisfaction. She had passed their first serious test while maintaining her cover and gathering valuable intelligence about the selection process. The real challenges were still ahead. The final week of selection arrived with the most challenging exercise yet, a 3-day field training exercise that would test everything the recruits had learned. They would be divided into small teams and given a complex mission that required navigation, tactical planning, communication, and leadership under extreme stress. The exercise was designed to identify not just individual capabilities, but also how candidates performed as part of a team when everything went wrong. Sarah found herself assigned to a team with Jake Thompson, Marcus Rivera, and Tom Chen. The irony wasn't lost on her. She would be working closely with two of the recruits who had been most determined to force her out of the program. The fourth member, Tom, had remained neutral, but was clearly suspicious about her background and capabilities. Their mission briefing took place in a windowless room at 0400 hours. Major Williams, the selection course commander, outlined their assignment with the kind of precise detail that left no room for misunderstanding. Your team will infiltrate a simulated enemy compound, gather intelligence on their operations, and extract without being detected, he explained while pointing to aerial photographs and maps. You have 72 hours to complete the mission. You'll be operating in realistic conditions with opposing forces actively hunting for you. If you're captured, you fail. If you miss your extraction window, you fail. If you compromise the mission through poor operational security, you fail. The compound was located deep in the forest, surrounded by rough terrain that would challenge their navigation and movement skills. The opposing forces included instructors and advanced students from other military schools, all trained to detect and capture infiltrators. The intelligence they needed to gather included detailed information about defensive positions, communication procedures, and operational schedules that could only be obtained through close observation and careful reconnaissance. Team leaders will rotate every 24 hours, Major Williams continued. Each of you will have the opportunity to plan and execute a portion of the mission. Your leadership will be evaluated based on decision-making under pressure, ability to adapt when plans fail, and effectiveness in accomplishing the assigned objectives. Sarah was assigned as the second day's team leader, which meant she would take command after they had infiltrated the area and begun gathering intelligence. It was a critical phase of the mission that would test her ability to coordinate complex operations while avoiding detection. As the teams prepared for insertion, Jake pulled Marcus and Tom aside for a private conversation that Sarah could hear from her position nearby. "This is our chance to settle this once and for all," Jake said quietly. "When she's in charge tomorrow, we document every mistake, every bad decision, every sign that she can't handle the pressure. Then we present the evidence to the instructors and get her washed out before she can put real soldiers at risk in the field." Marcus nodded slowly. "I'm still not convinced she doesn't belong here, but if she can't handle leadership under pressure, that's something the instructors need to know." Tom remained silent, but Sarah could see him processing the plan. His military experience had taught him to be suspicious of anyone who seemed too good to be true, and Sarah's exceptional performance throughout the selection process had triggered his natural skepticism. "What if she actually does well?" Tom finally asked. "She won't," Jake said with confidence. "Leadership is different from just following orders. When she has to make decisions that affect other people's lives, when she has to deal with conflicting information and time pressure, she'll crack. Then we'll have our proof." And Sarah pretended to be focused on her equipment while listening to their conversation. She understood their perspective. Her performance had been exceptional enough to raise legitimate questions about her background and experience. What they didn't realize was that they were about to provide her with an opportunity to demonstrate skills that would go far beyond what any recruit should possess. The insertion began at nightfall. Each team was transported to different drop-off points several miles from their objective, forcing them to navigate through difficult terrain in darkness while avoiding detection by roving patrols. Sarah's team landed in a swampy area that required careful movement to avoid making noise that would alert the opposing forces. Under Tom's leadership for the first phase, the team moved slowly through the wetlands toward their objective. Tom's experience as an Air Force pararescue specialist had given him solid skills in land navigation and small unit tactics, but the challenging terrain and time pressure were testing his abilities. After 6 hours of careful movement, they reached a position where they could observe the target compound. It was well defended with multiple guard posts, overlapping fields of observation, and patrols that followed unpredictable routes designed to catch infiltrators off guard. "This is going to be tougher than I expected," Tom whispered as they studied the defensive positions through binoculars. "The guards are alert, the patrols are random, and there's not much cover for getting closer." Marcus pointed to a section of perimeter fence that appeared to have lighter security coverage. What about approaching from that direction? Looks like there might be a blind spot between those two guard towers. Jake nodded agreement. Better than trying to go through the front door. Sarah studied the compound with the analytical skills she had developed during years of real operations. She could see patterns in the patrol routes that the others had missed, weaknesses in the defensive positions that weren't obvious from a casual observation, and opportunities for infiltration that would require advanced tactical knowledge to exploit. The patrol pattern repeats every 47 minutes, she said quietly. There's a gap in coverage along the eastern perimeter that lasts for approximately 3 minutes when both patrols are at the far ends of their routes. The other 3 team members turned to look at her with surprise. Tom had been observing the compound for over an hour and hadn't noticed the detailed timing pattern that Sarah had identified in just a few minutes. How did you figure that out so quickly? Marcus asked. Counted the timing intervals, Sarah replied simply, though her explanation didn't capture the sophisticated analysis she had actually performed. Tom continued to lead the team through the first day of the exercise, but Sarah's observations and insights were consistently more accurate and detailed than anyone else's. By the time they rotated leadership responsibilities, it was clear to all of them that her tactical knowledge went far beyond what a typical military intelligence analyst should possess. When Sarah took command for the second day, the team's mission shifted to active intelligence gathering. They needed to get close enough to the compound to observe and document specific activities, then withdraw without being detected. It was exactly the kind of operation that required the skills she had developed during her real career, and maintaining her cover was going to be extremely challenging. Our objective for today is to identify the command structure and communication procedures used by the opposing force. Sarah briefed the team as they prepared to move closer to the compound. We need detailed information about shift changes, decision-making processes, and how they coordinate responses to potential threats. Her briefing was comprehensive and professional, covering contingencies and backup plans that demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of reconnaissance operations. Jake and Marcus exchanged glances, both noting that her leadership style was markedly different from what they had expected. How do you want to approach this? Tom asked, his suspicion now mixed with genuine curiosity about her background. Sarah studied the terrain around the compound, identifying routes and positions that would allow them to observe the target while remaining undetected. Her plan was complex and risky, requiring precise timing and coordination, but it would provide them with intelligence that other teams wouldn't be able to gather. We'll establish 3 observation posts around the perimeter, she explained while sketching positions on the map. Marcus will take the northern position to monitor the main gate and administrative area. Jake will cover the eastern approach where most of the logistics activity takes place. Tom will handle communications and provide overwatch from the southern ridge. What about you? Marcus asked. I'll be moving between positions to coordinate observations and deal with any problems that come up, Sarah replied. It was a leadership approach that put her in the most dangerous position while giving each team member clear responsibilities that matched their individual strengths. Jake had expected her to make rookie mistakes or show signs of stress under pressure. Instead, her planning was sophisticated and her confidence genuine. As they moved into position, Sarah's tactical skills became impossible to ignore. Her movement through the forest was silent and efficient. Her positioning always optimized both observation capabilities and escape routes. Her communication with the team was professional and clear, using radio procedures that suggested extensive field experience. From his observation post, Marcus watched Sarah move between positions with a fluidity that reminded him of the most experienced special operations soldiers he had encountered. Her situational awareness was exceptional, and her ability to gather detailed intelligence while remaining undetected was far beyond what any recruit should possess. Something's not right about this, he whispered to Tom over their communications link. She's too good at this stuff. Tom had reached the same conclusion from his overwatch position. I've been watching her work, and she's using techniques that aren't taught in basic military training. Advanced reconnaissance, counter-surveillance, tactical movement. This is specialized stuff. Jake was having his own realization as he watched Sarah coordinate the intelligence-gathering operation. His plan to document her failures was falling apart because she wasn't making any mistakes. Every decision she made was tactically sound, every instruction was clear and appropriate, and her leadership was actually improving their team's performance. "Maybe we've been wrong about her," he finally admitted over the radio. As the day progressed, Sarah's team gathered intelligence that far exceeded the mission requirements. They had identified the complete organizational structure of the opposing force, documented their communication procedures, and even discovered weaknesses in their security that could be exploited by follow-on operations. But Sarah's exceptional performance was also creating problems for her mission. Her skills were so advanced that they were drawing attention from the instructors who were monitoring the exercise. At several points during the day, she noticed observation teams that were clearly evaluating her specifically, rather than the team's general performance. The crisis came during the evening hours when her team encountered an unexpected patrol that threatened to compromise their position. A normal response would be to withdraw and avoid contact, but Sarah realized that retreat would put them in the path of another patrol that the others hadn't detected. Instead, she made a decision that revealed the depth of her real training. Using techniques that belonged in advanced special operations rather than basic selection exercises, she guided her team through a complex evasion maneuver that not only avoided the immediate threat, but also positioned them to complete their intelligence-gathering mission ahead of schedule. "How did you know about that second patrol?" Tom asked after they had successfully avoided detection. Sarah paused, realizing that her answer would either maintain her cover or reveal more than she wanted to disclose. "Sound carries differently at night," she said finally. "You can hear movement patterns if you know what to listen for." It was a plausible explanation, but all three of her teammates now understood that Sarah possessed knowledge and skills that went far beyond her official military record. The question was what they were going to do about it. On the final day of the exercise, under Marcus's leadership, the team successfully extracted from the area with all required intelligence. Their mission had been completed flawlessly, largely due to Sarah's contributions during the critical intelligence gathering phase. As they waited for pickup at their extraction point, Jake finally confronted Sarah directly about her background. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I was wrong about whether you belong here, but I still don't understand who you really are. Your skills, your knowledge, your experience, it doesn't match up with your official record." Sarah looked at each of her teammates, understanding that her cover was no longer sustainable. They had worked closely enough with her to recognize that she wasn't who she appeared to be, and continuing to pretend otherwise would be both pointless and potentially counterproductive. "You're right," she said simply. "There are parts of my background that aren't in my official record." "What kind of parts?" Marcus asked. Before Sarah could answer, the sound of approaching helicopters indicated that their extraction was arriving. As they prepared to board the aircraft, Major Williams appeared with a small team of officers that didn't belong to the selection course staff. "Recruit Mitchell," he said formally. "Please come with us." Sarah's teammates watched in confusion as she was escorted to a separate helicopter by officers who clearly outranked everyone involved in the selection exercise. As her aircraft departed in a different direction from theirs, they began to understand that there had been much more to their teammates' presence than anyone had realized. 2 hours later, Sarah sat in a secure briefing room at a location that wasn't marked on any public maps. Across from her sat Colonel Harrison, her actual commanding officer, along with Major Williams and several other officials who had been monitoring her mission from the beginning. "Outstanding work," Colonel Harrison began. "Your evaluation of the selection process has provided valuable insights that will improve the program's effectiveness and security." End of footnote. Though she was still processing the implications of having her cover blown during the final exercise. "The recruits I worked with figured out that my background didn't match my record." "And that was expected," Major Williams interjected. "The whole point of this exercise was to see how long your cover would hold under close scrutiny from motivated and intelligent observers. The fact that it lasted until the final week tells us that our cover identity construction is working effectively." Colonel Harrison leaned forward. "More importantly, your performance during the exercise revealed some concerning gaps in our training program. The tactical skills you demonstrated should have been beyond the reach of any recruit, regardless of their background. The fact that you could display advanced special operations capabilities while maintaining plausible deniability suggests that our evaluation methods may not be sufficient to identify candidates with prior specialized training." Her mission had revealed that someone with her background could potentially infiltrate the selection program while concealing their true capabilities, In the wrong hands, that knowledge could represent a significant security vulnerability. "What about the recruits I worked with?" she asked. "They'll be debriefed appropriately," Major Williams replied. "They've earned the right to know that they were participating in a security evaluation, though the details of your actual background will remain classified." As Sarah prepared for her next assignment, she reflected on the weeks she had spent with the Special Forces candidates. Despite their initial hostility and misguided attempts to force her out of the program, they had eventually recognized and accepted her capabilities. More importantly, they had demonstrated the kind of adaptability and professional growth that the selection process was designed to identify. Jake Thompson, Marcus Rivera, and Tom Chen would all go on to complete the selection program successfully. Their experience working with Sarah had challenged their assumptions and broadened their understanding of what it meant to be a soldier. They would never know her real identity or the full extent of her background, but they had learned important lessons about judging others based on preconceptions rather than performance. The final irony was that Sarah's unofficial mission had been more challenging than many of her real operations. Maintaining a false identity while working closely with intelligent and motivated individuals had required skills that went beyond combat training or tactical expertise. It had required her to manage complex social dynamics while performing at a high level, without revealing too much about her true capabilities. As she left the briefing room to begin her next classified assignment, Sarah smiled slightly at the memory of Jake's early comment about cheerleader tryouts. If he only knew that the woman he had tried to intimidate was one of the most highly trained operators in the entire military, he would probably never believe it. But that was exactly the point. The most dangerous opponents were often the ones you never saw coming, and the most effective operators were those who could hide in plain sight until the moment they chose to reveal their true nature. Sarah Mitchell had proven that lesson once again, though her students would never know they had been taught.